Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. You're listening to Newcastle Fast FM. Alhamdulillah, we're live on the YouTube, on the Facebook. I've just sent out my messages to my contacts to join in, to tune in. And inshallah, we're going to check if the audio is working. And it appears that it is. So, brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, this is the show which is going to be happening every single day, Monday to Friday, 6 o'clock to 7 p.m. from darkness to light with myself, Richard Coupland. And this is a show which I've done, alhamdulillah, I think a good number of Ramadans now. Every single year I used to do it on a Saturday or on a Sunday. And generally the show originally, From Darkness to Light, was focused all about the stories of new Muslims, the stories of converts, the stories of reverts to this religion, and talking about issues and topics that are related to new Muslims. So I would get some guests on, some revert brothers who would share their story, share some benefits. We would discuss some issues that are related to new Muslims, issues with family maybe, issues with various different things. And okay, I think I have to sit in a different position then because the hill's commenting, but inshallah, it's all good. But what I want to do is expand it a bit more. Alhamdulillah, From Darkness to Light is a very, very broad title and topic. And the reality is that many of us are in the darkness about many different things. In the show originally, it was the darkness of not being Muslim, the darkness of kufr, of disbelief, the darkness of not having faith in Allah and not knowing what is my purpose in life and why am I here? And the story was that darkness of disbelief, of not knowing your purpose in life and coming to the light of Islam. But the reality is, for many of us that are born Muslim, many of us that become Muslim, is we have darkness about many, many different topics, not just, not being Muslim. So many of us have darkness about what does faith mean? Many of us have darkness about many of the Islamic sciences. For example, the sciences of hadith, usul al-hadith. Many of us don't know much about it. We hear that this hadith is sahih, this hadith is authentic, this hadith is da'if, this hadith is weak, this hadith is mawdu', fabricated. But what do those terms mean? Or this hadith is mursal or mu'allaq. We don't know what these mean. Similarly with the sciences of the Quran. How was the Quran preserved? How did the Quran come to us? How do we explain the Quran? How do we know what Allah originally intended in the Quran? These are topics which many of us are in darkness about. And alhamdulillah, we're Muslim. Alhamdulillah, we're trying to practice the deen, but maybe we don't really know much about these topics. So over the month of Ramadan, I wanted to do various different topics for us to go through and learn through. And inshallah, I'm going to be having a number of guests on the show. And we're going to be talking about different things. So alhamdulillah, one of the things we are going to be talking about is we are going to be having some revert brothers, some convert brothers, inshallah, coming onto the show, sharing us their stories, sharing us their journey of how they became Muslim. Many of us, we were born Muslim, and it's something we often take for granted, that we know how to pray, we know about Islam, we know the basics. But imagine not knowing Islam for 17 years, or not knowing Islam for 20 years, or 40 years, or 50 years. What was the life like? And what led these people to become Muslim? What led these people to learn about the religion? So inshallah, we'll have those guests on. They can share their stories, they can share their journeys, and we can try and benefit from it for us to reflect upon ourselves and our situation and hopefully encourage us to try and learn more and do more. As well, I want to talk about a bit about da'wah, a bit about explaining Islam to those that are not Muslim yet. So we're going to do some shows, have some guests on, talking about issues to do with Christianity. How do I explain Islam to a Christian? Some topics about atheism. How do I, explain Islam to someone who doesn't believe in Allah? And various different, dawah explaining Islam related topics. And again, as I mentioned, I do really want to do a few shows about the sciences of hadith for us to really understand just some basics. When we read that, for example, this scholar, Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy upon him, he said this hadith is sahih. What is a sahih hadith? What does that mean? How do we know that something is authentic to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him? And how do we know that it's not fabricated? How do we know there's not doubt about it? How do we know that it's 100% true? Or how do we know it's something that he said and something that he did? That's what, inshallah, I want us to cover. And inshallah, every Friday I'm going to be having a special show, inshallah. I'm going to be inviting my wife onto the show, inshallah. And we're going to be talking about a number of different topics. And hopefully, I think the viewers will find them shows beneficial. So I do encourage you to tune into those shows as well. But as you can probably see from the topic of the stream today, is that what I really wanted to do is to give a short introduction about myself, about this person called Richard Coupland. It's From Darkness to Life with Richie, From Darkness to Life with Richard. But I really wanted to share with you a bit about my story, a bit about my journey, that, inshallah, you can take some benefits away from that, and you can really learn from my story, learn a bit more about me. So when you're listening to me speak here, you feel maybe a bit more confident with what I am saying. So inshallah, that's the topic of today. And then the next few days, we're going to have some guests on, inshallah, talking about their stories to Islam. And inshallah, this Friday, we'll have that special show, inshallah, with myself and my wife talking about various different topics. So I do encourage you, brothers and sisters, tune in every single day between 6 to 7. To answer some questions, alhamdulillah, the sound is looking good. Virtual background, it possibly could be a virtual background. So yeah, that's good. And you're right, Abbas, that is pretty much the only thing I haven't sold on Facebook Marketplace yet, is my books, alhamdulillah. So my name is Richard Coupland. I was originally born in Stockton upon Tees, which is near Middlesbrough, North Tees Hospital, which is near Middlesbrough, which is a town, a city, which is near Newcastle in the northeast of the United Kingdom, or the northeast of England. Alhamdulillah, I was born in 1995, so that makes me 24 now, soon going to be 25. And I guess I was raised, so I grew up, I think, like the majority or many people in the UK in that time period, sort of culturally Christian, in the sense of, I would say, yeah, I'm Christian. I'd go to sort of Christian primary schools, Christian secondary schools. We'd go to the church for weddings, for funerals, for christenings. I always phrase it in the sense of, if I went to the doctor's office and, you fill in the form about what religion are you, I would tick Christian. And I would say, I do believe that, Jesus is the Son of God. I believe in the Bible, but sort of just because, that was what I was grew up with, that's what I was sort of used to. So my primary school that I went to was originally Church of England. So used to, obviously, doing various Bible readings. You hear about Jesus, the story of the Bibles in assemblies and things like that. I, used to do nativity plays and, some choir stuff, and different things like that, as generally you do as you're growing up. And then my secondary school, which I moved to, was Christian Ethos, as they phrased it. It was very more Baptist, more evangelical, maybe more preachy side of Christianity. Often what you see in maybe South America, in the sense of United States of America, in Texas, etc. I know in the school every single year, a group of Christian, youthful Christians, they would come from the state of Texas, on sort of an exchange program with their church there. They would spend time with us, tell us about the Bible, do assemblies. They would join us in our religious studies, and tell us about Jesus and Christianity. And as well as secondary school, every single form, for every single form tutor, every classroom would have Bibles on the wall. When I originally started, we used to read through the Bible in sort of assemblies and tutor time. So there was always that thing about, I knew about the Bible, growing up about the Bible. I had stories. But I think what really changed for me is, as I started getting a bit older, maybe 14, 15, entering my teenage years, yeah, 9, 10, maybe, I started thinking, okay, what do I actually really believe? I've been raised sort of Christian, told about the Bible and told about Jesus and these things. But how do I know these things are actually true? And it sort of led me onto a journey of really reading and investigating more about Christianity, investigating more about the Bible. And my investigations, my readings, and my research ultimately led me to leave religion entirely, to leave Christianity, and to leave belief in God at all, to have a position in which I said that in order to prove something that you believe, you need evidence, and you do not have any evidence for the existence of God. There's no proof, there's no evidence, there's nothing. It's just people's emotions, people wanting to believe in a higher power. And Christianity, there's no evidence for it to be true. There's no reasons to believe in the Bible. And what ultimately led me to that is many different things. But one of the key things was, as I began to research more about the Bible, I have some Bibles up there. As I read more about the Bible, its history, I began to realize that this text wasn't fully preserved, and it didn't fully represent an original message that Jesus taught. And you can look at this many different ways, but for me, it's very simple. Like if you open up the New Testament, so the Bible, the Protestant Bible, is made up of 66 different books. The Old Testament, which is made up of the Torah, which is the first 5 books. Then it's made up of different books of prophets, and then it's made up of different books of history of different nations of the Jewish people. And that's generally, the Old Testament is generally made up of is generally the Hebrew Bible, which contains the first 5 books, which are classed as the Torah. So, that's the Old Testament. And then the New Testament is, Old Testament basically is everything from the beginning of creation all the way up until the time of just before Jesus. The New Testament begins with the 4 Gospels of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, telling the story of Jesus, what's his history, what did he do, what's his message. Then afterwards you have the book of Acts, which describes what did the followers and the followers of Jesus do after his death. And then you have various different writings of Paul, who's an early Christian figure, different writings of Peter, book of Hebrews, who they said they're not sure who authored it, and various different works by different authors. But what I began to realize is that if I pick up, for example, the King James Version of the Bible, and you start reading along, which as you do, and then you pick up, for example, the New International Version or the English Standard Version of the Bible, which is more of a modern version, a modern translation, you realize that many verses that you'll come across, they weren't in the original earliest manuscripts of the book. Meaning that when biblical scholars, they gathered the manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, over 5,000 manuscripts that they have for various different time periods, and when they gathered them together, they realized that there was parts that weren't in the original text, meaning that they must have been added later on as additions. And often, if you read along in the Bible, New International Version, etc., in the footnotes you'll see this. This wasn't in the original manuscripts or the earliest manuscripts. So the question is there. It's clear that there's been distortion of the text here, and that through time things have been changed. And I began at the time watching various different lectures of biblical scholars who study the text of the Bible. Started watching, for example, Bart Ehrman, who's quite a famous one, who used to be Christian, left the religion. He's written a number of different books, watching his lectures, his debates with Christians. Listening to someone called James White, listening to, other Christians and apologetics and those that are arguing against it. And it began clear that this text, one, had gone. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brothers and sisters. I lost internet connection, so I'm not sure if this is still working. So I'm going to run some tests, and we'll pick off where I left off. Hello, 1, 2, 3. So inshallah the stream is working. Just need confirmation that everybody can still hear me. Nope, am I working? Can you hear it? Or can you see the visualization? Right, so we're back. So where I left off is we were talking about the Holy Bible. This is quite a nice copy here, got silver lining. King James, quite a nice copy. And New International Version. So I was talking about the Bible is what I basically, in short, to summarize, is I began reading and learning that things have been changed in the Bible. That many of the contents, for example, in this book, which is King James Version, you would realize is no longer present or has been noted that it has been changed in this version. And I remember studying in my GCSE RE GCSE. I took obviously a study of the Gospel of Mark as part of my GCSE, and one of the key things that we learn about in the Gospel of Mark is, if you look in 16 at the end, from verse 9 onwards, the New International Version states, the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have Mark 16, 9 to 20, meaning that from verses 9 onwards, which speak about Jesus coming and appearing and speaking to different people, it wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. And there's a famous story of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. And the story in which a woman's caught in adultery, and Jesus says to the people, whoever is without sin, let him cast the first stone. It's a famous story, people quote it, it's become very part of a Christian message of forgiveness, etc. But biblical scholars know that this isn't in the earliest manuscripts, and was something that was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after Jesus. It was found in the manuscripts, added into the Bible. So I began watching Bart Ehrman and other people who spoke about the text of the Bible. I realized it had been changed. And secondarily, I realized that these works that were speaking about, for example, writings of Paul and other people, how could these writings be divine? In the story of Paul, he's a man who originally persecuted Christians until he had a vision in which he saw Jesus, and then he became a Christian and started preaching Christianity. But again, all these writings that he's writing, how can you say that these are divine? Like, they're just writings of a human being. And as well, what's interesting about the four Gospels for me, especially when I look back at them now, is, especially if you read the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, he's speaking about, like, he's collecting, eyewitness accounts and stories of the life of Jesus, and he's writing them down and sending them to one of his friends. They're collections of stories that may be true and may not be true. And as somebody learns about the science of hadith, we realize that in the books of history, there are lots of stories and lots of narrations. And some are authentic, some are not authentic. Some of them have narrators that aren't truthful, narrators that aren't trustworthy. Some of them have chains that don't go back to the original people. And that's why I view the Gospels and the Bible itself, is that you have people that didn't meet Jesus, people that are unknown. We don't know who wrote the four Gospels. They have titles, but we don't actually know the original authors. And they're narrating stories that people are mentioning, stories that people are saying happened to Jesus, etc. But there's no science to sift out what is truthful and what's not truthful. So I began to realize, okay, this text, it wasn't preserved, it wasn't correct. And I think as well, when you start thinking about the theology and to the questionnaire, we'll come to talk about the Quran and its preservation in a second, don't worry. But when we talk about the theology in Christianity, I think it's something that on the apparent, it doesn't seem to make sense, in the sense of that the belief in the Trinity, in which there is one Godhead that is in three divine persons that are co-equal, co-eternal, and they have all power, etc., exactly the same. Again, it doesn't make sense to give divinity to a human being. It doesn't make sense that a man who was created, a man who was given birth to, a man who eats and drinks, to say that this person is divine. And if you look at the message throughout the Old Testament, and the message that Islam teaches is that God sent prophet and messengers to all of mankind, to different areas, to different places, with one message: to worship God alone and not to worship anything else. And that's what you see throughout the Old Testament. But then all of a sudden, there's this new theology in which that, no, God is actually three different persons. He's not one God, like Unitarian. He's different persons, and you should pray to Jesus, and Jesus is divine, and Jesus is God. This is something that the innate within yourself, it doesn't feel right to believe in. I think that the key issues that I realized is, what is there any proof that Christianity is true? And when I would speak to Christians and people, teachers, etc., and ask them, why do you believe what you believe? Often it was either blind faith, something you should just believe in, or it was, something that is emotional. Jesus loves you. Jesus wants the best for you. He died for you. But again, this is just all emotion and blind faith. There's no reason for them to give me, okay, why is the Bible true? Why is Christianity true? So I realized that, okay, I left this because I realized there was no evidence. Again, reading stories in the Old Testament, I read many things that I had issues with morally, as God commanding massacres of men, women, and children, and various different ethical things that I found difficulty with, led me as well to leave the religion. So I left Christianity, and again as well, I left any belief in theism, any belief in God, because I looked at the point is, where's the proof? Where's the evidence that there is this creator, this designer, this God of the universe? Where's the proof? And nobody at the time was able to give me any arguments or any reason or logic that proved that. And I think as well, a lot of it came through. I began watching a lot of debates on YouTube and on the internet of Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, a lot of their debates, a lot of their discussions, a lot of their videos, and when they were putting forth this idea of, okay, we need to be rational, we need to be scientific, we need to analyze these belief systems, and that these are things that people over hundreds of years they made up for themselves in order for them to feel content, and that there's no philosophical evidence, there's no logical evidence for God's existence. And that was the state I was for a good number of years, in which I used to debate and argue a lot with people of believing of different religions, and a lot of arguments, I used to laugh a lot, I used to mock people, I used to challenge people quite heavily, attend some debate clubs and things like that. But a change sort of happened, I think, as I grew and got older, is I began to think, okay, obviously I say that I'm an atheist, I say that I don't believe in any God, I'll say that I don't believe in any religion, but if I'm really true to that claim, I need to learn more about the other religions that are in the world. Christianity and Judaism, I felt that I'd read a lot, I'd watched a lot, and even now I'm still learning, and there's things that even then I didn't know and now I know, and maybe things that I believed then that are not correct that I know now. But a lot of these other religions, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, more of the Eastern, more foreign religions, I didn't know a lot about, to be honest. So I began to do some research and do some reading about these other religions. So I did some reading about Buddhism, reading about the story of Buddha, and his story of enlightenment. And these things were cool stories. It was a cool story, it's a cool thing. But I didn't again see any reason for this to be true and for me to follow it. And as well, I was happy living my own life, doing my own thing. This point, it's to start of sixth form, start of college. So 15, 16, I'm busy sort of doing my own thing. I didn't need to leave and become a monk or leave and then try and achieve this enlightenment. So I knew Buddhism, it was a cool idea, but not necessarily had any truth behind it. Began looking into Hinduism, and again, things there, it was clear that why would this be true? Like, what's the proof that any of this is true? What's the evidence that these scriptures are preserved? It seemed like a lot of folklore, a lot of stories, a lot of things that have just been passed down, and people have told stories throughout the Indian continent throughout time. So again, I didn't find any reasons to believe in that. So then I began obviously looking into Islam, and at the beginning, my perspectives of Islam were very negative. I think obviously what I've seen online, maybe some few things I read on the internet, obviously Islam I used to think was very negative. It was very harsh. It was caused terrorism. It was against women's rights. It was very oppressive. I know myself, I used to believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was this Arab warmonger who was fighting and killing and beheading people and marrying children and doing all these horrible things. That was my perspective of Islam. And I remember myself trying to have a few debates and discussions with the few Muslims that were in the college, and going on the internet, typing in jihad in Islam and killing non-Muslims in Islam, and pulling up all these websites that are written against people that hate Islam, people that quote things out of context, and saying, look, this website says this and it says this in the Quran, and taking all these verses out of context. So that was this perspective that I came from. But I think it was a slow journey of actually reading and researching about Islam that I came to realize that a lot of things that I thought were not true. And I think it was the patience of a sister in my college in the sixth form. She used to, share the Quran with me. She used to tell me things. And I think there's a great lesson to be taken there, that she necessarily didn't have lots of knowledge herself. She was maybe just born Muslim, she grew up with it, but she was something that she was sincere in what she did. I think that's the point, often when we're trying to explain Islam to people, we feel like we need to have all the knowledge, we need to have all the answers. But she didn't have all the answers, she didn't have all the knowledge of everything, but rather what she did know, she just passed on. And what she didn't know, she would send me links, she would send me books, she would try and tell me things. And that made a huge difference. And myself, I began reading, began watching a lot of YouTube, different speakers on the internet. I don't know, Asaka Naik and Mufti Mank and all these different people. Start watching, listening, okay, what they got to say, watch their debates with different people and their discussions and their lectures. A lot of the negative things I had about Islam, I knew were not correct. I knew that I didn't teach these things. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. That just means that I had misconceptions about it. So I began to approach Islam in a similar manner of why I left Christianity and other religions. So I began to look at the Quran, and for me, Islam, it's the truth of it is it holds upon the Quran being true. So okay, the first thing I thought, okay, is I need to look into this history of this book. How do I know that this, the Quran that I hold today, how do I know that this is preserved, and how do I know that it's authentic? So with the Quran, obviously we know that it was revealed in the Arabic language, and the Arabic language is something that has been preserved and something that is still spoken. And why I say that is because obviously other texts in ancient languages, there are the languages that are not spoken anymore. Ancient Greek, ancient Hebrew, not modern day Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and things like these are languages that are not really spoken. But Arabic is still alive today, still spoken today. And the books of the old Arabs, of the linguists and the people of language, is still preserved. Okay, so they have this text that's in Arabic. So how do I know that it's been preserved? And again, this took a lot of researching and reading. It wasn't I just read one thing and followed it. I had to buy some books that have manuscripts inside them and read about the history of the Quran. And the Quran, what's amazing about it is that it was preserved in two ways. One, which is unique to the Quran and unique to Islam, and to me is a great evidence for the truth of the religion, was that it was preserved orally, and the second way it was preserved obviously in written manuscripts. So what was unique about Islam was this oral preservation. That the Quran had been, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace upon him, would get the revelation, he would call his scribes who would write down the revelation on different parchments, bone, different things. And again, then the people would memorize the verses, and these verses would be spread amongst the community, and they would be recited in the prayers, and people would memorize them and learn them and teach them to people. So the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, his followers, they memorized the Quran, and they passed this Quran onto their students, who passed it onto their students, in such a way that it's called mutawatir, which is meaning like recurrent reporting, meaning that so many people are transmitting it from so many different areas in the world that it's impossible that they all came together to fabricate it. Meaning you have, for example, 30 people in Iraq, 20 people in Medina, 20 people in Morocco, 50 people in Egypt, 100 people here, all reciting the Quran and reciting the same Quran. How is it if they were all, trying to change a verse and fabricate things, how could they all recite the same verse? And if they did make a mistake, there was 99, there was many other people to correct them. So the point is that the Quran has come down in these mutawatir chains of narration. That is enough evidence for us. Even if there was no written manuscripts, there was nothing we could go back to. This is evidence, because it's impossible that they fabricated it and they made it up. And that's something that I found that is beautifully unique to Islam, is the science of isnad, or the science of the chain of narration. And it's something that, again, points to the truth for myself subjectively, is because if you look at Christianity, you look at Judaism and any other religion, is they have the scripture, the text, but the issue they have is the interpretation of the text. And that's why you see lots of differing, is because people come to the text and they interpret what they want into the text. They don't have the prophet explaining the text who revealed it, or the author of the text, or the author's students. But in Islam, we have the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He explains the text in many narrations, and the companions explain the text in many narrations, and the students of the companions explain the text in many narrations. And we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, so many narrations of different people and different scholars that explain the text, which is unique to Islam because you have the text, but you also have that interpretation and the grounding of the text, ensuring that the meaning isn't changed. So one way was through this oral transmission. The second way is through manuscripts. Things are written down. So the Prophet, he called the people who would write the manuscripts. And when the Prophet passed away in the time of Abu Bakr, he made a committee amongst the companions in which they came together, and a group of the companions came together, and they were ordered to make a mushaf, put all the manuscripts and the memorization, put it into one book. So that's what they did. They got all the different manuscripts that they had, all the different writings that they had. They gathered, the people, the Huffaz, the people that memorized the Quran, and they compiled the Quran together in one, based on everything that everyone had memorized and everyone that had written down. And time is short, but basically in short, this gets passed on, this gets copied, this gets sent to different areas in the state, in the country. But to summarize it in short, is that basically we have many, many manuscripts. I think over that, within the first 100 years after Islam, after the Hijrah, they have around about over 94% of the Quranic text. And for textual criticism, this is huge, because in the New Testament, in the first 100 years of the text, you have very little. You have, cards of a few verses here, and a section of a chapter here, within the first 100 years of the text being written. You have very little. But in Islam, we have so many manuscripts that match the Quran we have today. So I realized, okay, long story short, okay, this text has been preserved, it's been sent down. But again, that doesn't mean that it's true. That doesn't mean that it's divine. So it led to me looking into, okay, what are some of the arguments that Muslims give for the Quran to being a divine revelation? And due to time being short, as we have to finish in a minute, I looked into many different arguments. That the Quran is a linguistic miracle, meaning that the literary features of the Quran were unable to be matched at the time by even the best Arab poets. And this is a time where poetry was at its best. The Arabs, they pride themselves in the poetry. Yeah, unlettered, someone who hadn't learned, studied, someone who was a shepherd, a trader, comes and produces a book in which the best poets at the time couldn't match. The best poets at the time, they couldn't explain. And because of this, the Arabs accepted Islam. So the Quran is this linguistic miracle which highlights that it couldn't be made by a human being. Rather, the only explanation is divine. Because if the Arabs at the time, they failed the challenge, and non-Arabs can't do the challenge because you have to know Arabic. Again, and it leads to, okay, maybe the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, did it, but it doesn't make logical sense that he did this. The only answer would be that it's divine. And this is the challenge that the Quran gives in the second chapter. It says that if you're in doubt about this book that we've revealed upon our servant, then produce a chapter like it and call upon your allies and friends to help you. So it gives a challenge that if you think this book it's made up, it's invented, then produce a chapter like it. And the Arabs at the time, they failed. So that's something that for me was, okay, this is interesting. Looking into it, reading, researching lectures, articles about it. Again, I started looking into some of the prophecies in the Quran that came true. and prophecies which the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, staked the entire religion upon, with a huge chance that they could become false and the whole thing would be dismantled upon him. For example, he predicted the Romans fighting back against the Persians and defeating them within a certain time span. Predictions that Abu Lahab will not accept Islam, predictions about himself in hadith, about Berber Arabs, producing tall buildings, etc., etc. All these things that he predicted that came true. Some of them in his lifetime and some of them after his lifetime. Again, I started learning about the Quran, how it spoke about some things in history that are very unique that nobody else spoke about or nobody else knew about until recent times. And again, I've learned about the Quran and how it has a multi-layered approach, how its verses on the natural phenomena speak to the 7th century Arab, but also speak to the 21st century person, speaking about some things that possibly couldn't be known at the time. And, learning various different things. But the point is that all these different arguments that I learned about the Quran, they all came together to make me think about, okay, are all these things coincidences? Are all these things chances? Maybe it's a chance that this was guesses, it was a chance, it was a luck. And if you put all the luck and the chances together, and I tapped it into a calculator, I said, okay, maybe 0.5 per each one to the power of maybe there's 50. The probability of this being luck and chance is very, very small. So I began to think, okay, as well, I started looking into more taking the question of God and philosophical arguments for God more serious. So I started looking more into the cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, looking into the design argument a bit more, looking into the moral argument. And a lot of these arguments for myself, they pointed to, okay, it makes sense that there was, for example, a first cause. It makes sense that there is a creator. But again, it never gives you definitive proof of a specific religion. So okay, maybe there was something that began everything. Maybe there wasn't that was the first cause. But it didn't give truth to a specific religion. But for me, the Quran was that which highlighted to a specific religion, because of its reasons for it to be a miracle, its reasons for it to be something that could have been written by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as well, I think I began learning about his life and his message, and I began to ask the question of, okay, did the Prophet, peace upon him, was he a liar? Did he invent this message for his own gain? And if you look at someone, why would they lie? They lie for material possessions. They lie for status. They lie for a reason. But if you look at the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the early time when he was being persecuted and it was difficult, the people, they offered him everything. They offered him wealth. They offered him women. They offered him kingship. They offered him power. The things that he wanted, to do whatever he wanted, but he didn't accept that. So if this person was a liar, if he was somebody who was just doing it for gain, to make things up, to benefit himself, then he would have, okay, yeah, let's do a deal. I'll become the king and I'll get all the wealth and I'll tell people what to do. He would have done that, but he didn't. And again, okay, maybe he was crazy. He was, he thought he was telling the truth, but he really wasn't. But if you look at his character and his life and who he is, he's not a person that's crazy. He's not a person that has mental issues. And all these people wouldn't follow someone who had that, and he couldn't produce a text that is coherent in the manner for somebody who had a mental issue or somebody that was insane. So if you read his life, it highlights to me, okay, this person must have been telling the truth. So it was a lot of reading, a year of reading various different things, books, articles, videos online. But again, I didn't become Muslim. I knew all this information, I knew the points, I knew the arguments, but I didn't fully accept. And I think that's the point, is that when we're explaining Islam, we can't treat people like robots. Like if I give you the logical argument, you're going to accept it. If I give you the evidence, you're going to follow it immediately. Human beings are complex creatures, and different things are going to awaken the truth within them. And for myself, it was, okay, I read a lot of stuff online. I spoke to different people. I'm going to go to the mosque and I'm going to actually, speak to some Muslims there, speak about what I read and see what they have to say. So then I decided to go to the mosque in Middlesbrough for the Friday prayer. Very awkward experience, sat at the back, had to wear a hat, didn't really know what was going on. But for myself is when the brothers stood up to pray, they made the rows and the Imam started reciting the Quran, reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. Some sort of arrogance and some sort of barrier that was there went away. And when I went outside and spoke to some of the brothers out there, spoke to them things that I read, so they told me things that they knew. Suddenly, all these points that I had, they came together, and to me, it made sense that this was the truth. And then it's then that I decided to become Muslim. After a long journey of researching and reading about Islam and reasons for it to be true, I decided to become Muslim then. So that's my journey in short. Obviously, throughout this, there are many things that happened, and there are many specific arguments and specific things that I could go more detail into, but sadly we don't have the time. And there are also some subjective things. A lot of things that I've talked about are objective, meaning that you can go research them and you'll see if they're true or not to yourself. But some things were subjective to me, which reasons maybe why I became Muslim. Whether that was issues of, maybe getting tired of partying and drinking and not really finding true happiness in that. Maybe after becoming Muslim, after prayers I made, I saw things become true. These are things that I subjected to myself, which I think everybody has their own subjective things that point to truth and what they follow. So for me, it's a combination of these objective things and these subjective things. And that was me. I became Muslim, but Islam was very, okay, why do you believe in God? Boom, here's the argument, here's the premises, here's the reasons, and here's the conclusion. Why do you believe the Quran is true? Here is the reasons, here's the logic, and here's the conclusion. My religion was very much like that, and there wasn't much spirituality there. But for myself, I think maybe a year or 6 months after becoming Muslim, I got the opportunity to go on a retreat specifically for new Muslims. And on there, I began to learn more about the prayer. I began to learn more about the spiritual side of Islam. And that's why I felt for myself I really flourished. I think that's what Islam is. Yes, there is logic. Yes, there is evidence. But there's also the spirituality. And in Islam, in everything, you have to be balanced. The Prophet ﷺ, in many narrations, he spoke about the one who is extreme will be destroyed. So Islam is a religion of balance. And there's a balance there between having logic and evidence and reasons to believe what you believe is true. But you need that spirituality side, which comes through prayer, which comes through acts of charity, which comes through all the religious things in Islam. The spirituality comes. So alhamdulillah, that was in 2012, in August, when I was 17. Alhamdulillah, I'm 24. So that was coming up 8 years ago. That was my story, that was my journey. And hopefully in the future shows, I'm going to talk a bit more about, okay, what happened after I became Muslim? How did I learn the basics? How did I, how was the reaction of my family? How did I know what true Islam is true? There's so many people saying, this is Islam, this is Islam. How do you know what's true and how do I know what's right? And a bit more, I guess, how I learned some of the knowledge and some of the basics. Inshallah, we'll cover that in future shows. But brothers and sisters, like I said, I'll be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. And inshallah, tomorrow I'll give you an in-depth maybe timeline of the different guests and the different topics we're going to be going through. But that was my journey today. If people have any questions, they can obviously comment them on the Facebook or on the YouTube. Any questions, you can obviously message me as well, and I can answer them on different shows. And if you're watching this on repeat later on, you can still comment. I'll go back and check if there's any questions, and I'm happy to answer them in future shows. So, for example, one question here is that people would argue that the Quran wasn't compiled until much later. Again, as I mentioned in my talk, we learned that the Quran was written in the time of the Prophet, memorized in the time of the Prophet. It's when he passed away, the revelation has stopped. The companions then gathered it together into one mushaf. And this is hugely different, for example, in the New Testament, where you have, for example, Gospel of John, who we don't know who authored it, writing about Jesus' life, and he wrote it, say, 60 or 70 years after Jesus. Never met Jesus. He never met, that. He's just writing stories. That's hugely different than the Prophet himself commanding people to write down, his own disciples putting the book together. It's hugely different. And hopefully you can see the difference there, that there wasn't this huge gap. And well, even if there was this gap, who was doing it was people that learned the Quran from him, people that memorized it from him by one on one. Whereas obviously with the Bible, it's a much different situation. So, brothers and sisters, I want to thank you all. Thank you for listening. Inshallah, tune into the shows tomorrow throughout till Friday from 6 to 7. This has been From Darkness to Light with your brother Richard Coupland. Inshallah, I'll be back tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.